The scorching Texas sun beat down mercilessly on Samuel Morrison's weathered face as he surveyed his newly acquired land. 300 acres of hard-packed earth and stubborn mesquite stretched before him, a far cry from the green pastures of Kentucky he'd left behind. But this was his chance, his opportunity to build something lasting in the unforgiving landscape of West Texas. This land has good water, the previous owner had assured him. That old well near the eastern boundary, deepest in the county. Samuel wiped the sweat from his brow and adjusted his worn leather hat. His wife Martha and their 2 children, Emily and Jacob, were counting on him to make this work. The railroad was coming through in 2 years and land values would soar. All he had to do was survive until then. As he walked toward the eastern section of his property, the landscape gradually changed. The sparse grass gave way to patches of bare rock, and ancient oak trees cast long shadows despite the midday sun. It was here, in a small clearing surrounded by weathered limestone outcroppings, that he found the well. It was larger than he'd expected, nearly 8 feet across, constructed from carefully fitted stones that spoke of considerable age. The wooden cover was partially rotted, secured by a rusted iron chain. Samuel approached, already planning improvements. A proper windmill would draw water efficiently. Irrigation channels could transform this barren land into productive farmland. Stay away from the well. The voice startled him. Samuel spun around to find an elderly Apache woman standing at the edge of the clearing. Her long gray hair was braided with small bones and colorful beads, her weathered face marked by decades under the harsh sun. Her dark eyes held an intensity that made Samuel unconsciously step back. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I didn't hear you approach." Samuel removed his hat respectfully. "I'm Samuel Morrison. I just purchased this land from Thomas Caldwell." The woman's expression remained unchanged. "Ayanna," she said simply. "My name is Ayanna, and I tell you again, stay away from the well. Is there something wrong with the water? Is it contaminated?" Ayanna's weathered hands gripped a walking staff carved with intricate symbols. "Some things should remain buried, white man. Some waters should never be disturbed. This place," she gestured toward the well with her staff, "has been sealed for good reason." Samuel felt a chill despite the blazing heat. "Sealed, but it's just a well. I need the water for my crops, my family." "Your family?" Ayanna's voice carried a note of sadness. "Yes, you have little ones. This is why I warn you. The water runs deep here, but so do old sorrows. So do old hungers. I don't understand. Are you talking about Indian legends? Spirits?" Ayanna studied him for a long moment. "I am talking about truth, Mr. Morrison. Truth that my grandmother told me as her grandmother told her. This land has seen much pain, much loss, and some losses. They do not stay buried." A hot wind swept through the clearing, rattling the dry leaves of the oak trees. Samuel felt the hairs on his arms rise, though he couldn't say why. There was something about this place, something that made his instincts scream caution, even as his practical mind dismissed such notions. "I appreciate your concern," Samuel said carefully, "but I've invested everything I have in this land. I can't just abandon the best water source on the property because of stories." Ayanna nodded slowly, as if she'd expected this response. "Stories become stories for a reason, Mr. Morrison, but I see the hunger in your eyes, the same hunger that drove the others. Very well, but remember my words when the dreams begin. Remember when the shadows grow long even at noon, and remember that some doors once opened cannot be closed again." She turned to leave, then paused. "If you must use the well, do not look into its depths. Draw your water quickly and be gone before sunset. And if you hear singing from below, run." With that unsettling advice, Ayanna disappeared into the brush as silently as she had appeared, leaving Samuel alone with the ancient well and a growing sense of unease. He approached the well once more, his hand hovering over the rusted chain. The practical part of his mind urged him to remove the cover and inspect his new water source, but something deeper, something primal whispered warnings he couldn't ignore. As clouds began to gather on the horizon, Samuel made his decision. He would return tomorrow with proper tools and rope. Whatever secrets this well held, he would face them in broad daylight, with preparation and purpose. But as he walked back toward his farmhouse, he couldn't shake the feeling that something in the depths below was watching him go. The next morning dawned gray and overcast, unusual for the typically clear Texas sky. Samuel had spent a restless night, Martha's concerned questions echoing in his mind alongside Ayana's cryptic warnings. He'd told his wife about the encounter, though he'd downplayed the more unsettling aspects. Probably just trying to protect some sacred site, Martha had reasoned while preparing breakfast. The Apache have been driven from most of their ancestral lands. Can you blame them for being protective of what remains? Samuel wanted to believe it was that simple, but as he loaded his wagon with rope, a lantern, and tools for well inspection, he couldn't shake the memory of the fear in Ayana's eyes, fear that seemed far too real to be based on mere superstition. The ride to the eastern section of his property took 20 minutes through increasingly rough terrain. The oak trees seemed more gnarled in the gray morning light, their branches creating strange shadows that shifted and danced despite the still air. When Samuel reached the clearing, he found it exactly as he'd left it, yet somehow changed. The very atmosphere felt heavier, more oppressive. He set up his equipment methodically, trying to maintain the routine confidence that had served him well through years of farming. The rusted chain came free with some effort, and the rotted wooden cover lifted easier than expected. Samuel secured his rope to the sturdiest oak tree and prepared his lantern. The opening of the well yawned before him like a great dark mouth. Even with the gray daylight filtering down, the bottom remained invisible, swallowed by absolute blackness. Samuel lit his lantern and peered cautiously over the edge. The stone walls were smooth, expertly crafted, descending far deeper than any well Samuel had ever seen. The lantern light penetrated perhaps 20 feet before being swallowed by darkness. But there was something else, a faint sound echoing from below, almost like wind through distant caves. Just air circulation, Samuel told himself firmly. Deep wells often have complex airflow. He lowered the lantern on a length of rope, watching its glow descend into the depths. 20 feet, 30, 40, still no sign of water, though the sound grew more distinct. It was almost melodic, like singing. Samuel's blood went cold. Ayana's final warning echoed in his memory. If you hear singing from below, to run. But he was a practical man, and practical men didn't flee from unusual acoustics. He continued lowering the lantern, driven by a mixture of curiosity and stubborn determination. At 60 feet, the rope went slack. The lantern had reached bottom. What Samuel saw in that circle of light made him gasp and nearly lose his grip on the rope. The bottom of the well wasn't filled with water. Instead, it opened into what appeared to be a natural cavern. The lantern illuminated rough stone walls stretching beyond the light's reach, and what looked like passages. Multiple tunnels branching off in different directions, as if the well were merely the entrance to an extensive underground system. But it was what lay scattered across the cavern floor that made Samuel's hands tremble. Bones, not animal bones, these were clearly human remains, and not ancient ones weathered by time. Some still bore traces of fabric, leather, and metal. Personal belongings glinted in the lantern light. A pocket watch, a woman's hair comb, a child's toy horse carved from wood. The singing grew louder, more distinct, and Samuel realized with horror that it wasn't coming from wind through stone passages. The melody was too complex, too intentionally crafted. Someone, or something, was singing far below in those dark tunnels. As if responding to his realization, the singing stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was far worse than the mysterious melody had been. Samuel felt the weight of unseen attention, the certainty that something in those depths was aware of his presence. A new sound drifted up from below, a rustling, scratching noise as if something large was moving through the tunnels. The lantern light flickered, though there was no wind, and shadows began to dance across the cavern walls in patterns that defied the steady flame. Samuel hauled the lantern up with desperate speed, his practical mind finally overwhelmed by primal terror. As the light rose through the well shaft, he could swear he glimpsed movement in the tunnels below, dark, shapes flowing like liquid shadow between the stone passages. The lantern reached the surface just as the scratching sound grew loud, enough to echo clearly through the well shaft. Samuel grabbed his equipment and ran for his wagon, not bothering to replace the well cover. As his horse carried him away from the clearing at dangerous speed, he could hear something else drifting up from the exposed well, a sound that would haunt his dreams for years to come. Laughter, cold, ancient, and impossibly hungry. Behind him, dark clouds began to gather over the clearing, though the rest of the sky remained gray but clear. And from the depths of the uncovered well, something that had waited patiently for decades began its slow ascent toward the surface world. Samuel Morrison had looked into the well, and the well had looked back. Samuel barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the scattered bones at the bottom of the well, heard that ancient, hungry laughter echoing from the depths. Martha noticed his distress immediately. "You look terrible, Sam." "What happened out there?" she asked over breakfast, her voice tight with concern. "The well. It's not what we expected. It's deeper than normal and there are complications." Samuel pushed his eggs around his plate, appetite gone. "We might need to find another water source." Martha set down her coffee cup with a sharp clink. "Samuel Morrison, we invested our life savings in this land specifically because of that well. Thomas Caldwell guaranteed it was the best water source in the county. What kind of complications are we talking about?" Before Samuel could answer, 8-year-old Emily burst through the kitchen door, her face flushed with excitement. "Papa, there's an Indian lady outside who wants to talk to you." Through the window, Samuel saw Ayanna standing patiently beside the fence gate. Her presence both relieved and unnerved him. Part of him desperately wanted to understand what he'd witnessed, while another part wished he could pretend none of it had happened. "Martha, keep the children inside," Samuel said, rising from the table. "Sam, what aren't you telling me?" "Just please, I'll explain everything once I understand it myself." Samuel walked outside to find Ayanna studying his face with knowing eyes. "You looked," she said simply. "I can see it in your eyes. You saw what lies beneath." "Those bones, were they your people?" Ayanna shook her head sadly. "My people, your people. Mexican settlers, traders passing through. The well has claimed many over the years. It was not always a well, Mr. Morrison. Once, it was a sacred cave, a place where my ancestors would speak with the spirits of the deep earth. But something changed. Something awakened that should have remained sleeping." Samuel felt a chill despite the morning warmth. "What kind of something?" "My grandmother called it the hunger that walks below, a spirit of consumption, of endless appetite. It feeds on life, on hope, on the very essence that makes us human. When the first white settlers came to this area 60 years ago, they built the well to access the underground water. But they broke through into the sacred caverns, and the hunger tasted surface air for the first time in centuries." "That's just legend, superstition, is it?" Ayanna interrupted. "Tell me what you saw, Mr. Morrison. Tell me what you heard." Samuel's hands trembled as he recounted his experience. Ayanna listened without interruption, her expression growing more grave with each detail. "The bones at the bottom," she said finally. "How many would you estimate?" Dozens. Maybe more in the shadows where the light didn't reach. Thomas Caldwell was not the first owner of this land. There was the Martinez family before him, and the Hendersons before them, and others before them. All drawn by the promise of good water, all eventually gone. Caldwell was smart. He sold quickly when the dreams began. Dreams? They start as whispers in your sleep, voices calling from below, promising answers to your deepest desires. The hunger learns your weaknesses, your fears, your desperate wants. It offers solutions, trade agreements written in shadow and regret. Samuel's blood ran cold. He'd heard whispers in his restless sleep the night before, soft voices promising prosperity, success, everything he'd ever wanted for his family. He dismissed them as anxiety-induced nightmares. "There's a way to reseal it," Ayanna continued. "My grandmother taught me the old ceremonies, the proper rituals of binding, but it requires sacrifice, not of life, but of the thing you value most. The hunger feeds on desire, so it must be starved of what it craves. And if I don't? If I just leave the well alone?" Ayanna's weathered face grew infinitely sad. "The covering is gone, Mr. Morrison. You've seen into its realm, and it has seen into yours. The hunger knows of your family now, knows of their dreams and fears. It will call to them as it called to all the others, and one by one, they will answer." As if summoned by her words, Emily's voice drifted from the house. "Mama, do you hear that pretty singing? It's coming from outside." Samuel and Ayanna exchanged horrified glances. Martha's sharp response came immediately. "Emily, get away from that window right now." "But it's so beautiful, Mama. It's calling my name." Samuel ran toward the house, Ayanna close behind. Through the kitchen window he could see Emily pressed against the glass, her young face dreamy and distant. Martha was pulling her away from the window, but the child's gaze remained fixed on something in the distance, in the direction of the eastern boundary and the uncovered well. "Emily!" Samuel burst through the door and scooped his daughter into his arms. "What did you hear, sweetheart?" "A lady was singing my name, Papa. She wants me to come play with her. She says there are wonderful games in the dark places underground, and treasures hidden where the water sleeps." Emily's voice carried an eerie, sing-song quality that made Samuel's skin crawl. Martha grabbed Samuel's arm. "What is happening to our daughter?" Ayanna stepped forward. "The hunger has tasted her spirit. It knows her name now, knows her innocent heart. We have little time before it calls again, and each call will be stronger than the last." "What do we do?" Samuel's voice broke with desperation. "Tonight, when the moon is dark, we perform the binding ritual. But understand, Mr. Morrison, once we begin, there is no turning back. The hunger will fight us, will offer everything we've ever wanted to stop us from sealing it away. It will show us visions of prosperity, of perfect lives, of all our dreams fulfilled. We must resist, no matter what it promises." Samuel looked at his wife's frightened face, at his daughter's still dreamy expression, and made his choice. "What do you need me to do?" As Ayanna began explaining the ritual requirements, none of them noticed young Jacob standing quietly in the hallway, his head tilted as if listening to something only he could hear. His lips moved silently, as if repeating words whispered from far below the earth. The hunger was patient. It had waited decades for the right family, the right combination of desperation and desire, and now it was ready to feed. The sun set blood red. Over the Texas plains and with its dying light, the temperature dropped unexpectedly. Samuel had spent the day gathering the items Ayanna requested: salt from the oldest trade route, sage that grew wild near running water, and iron forged by honest labor, his grandfather's horseshoe from Kentucky. Martha had barricaded herself, and the children in their bedroom after Emily had twice tried to wander outside to hear the pretty songs. Young Jacob remained strangely quiet, sitting by his sister's bed and humming melodies that no child should know. "The children must stay inside tonight no matter what they hear or see," Ayanna warned as she and Samuel prepared for the ritual. "The hunger will try to use them against us. It knows that parents will sacrifice anything for their young." Samuel nodded grimly, checking the locks on all windows and doors. He'd nailed boards over the bedroom windows as an extra precaution, despite Martha's protests about feeling trapped. As full darkness settled over the land, Samuel and Ayanna made their way to the well by lantern light. The clearing felt different at night, older, more primal, as if the boundary between the modern world and ancient times had worn thin. The temperature continued to drop, their breath visible in the suddenly frigid air. "This is unnatural," Samuel observed, pulling his coat tighter. "The hunger draws warmth from the world above to feed its coldness below," Ayanna explained, setting down her leather satchel of ritual items. "We are entering its domain now, subject to its influence." They began by creating a circle of salt around the well's opening. As Samuel poured the white granules, Ayanna chanted in her native language, words that seemed to resonate strangely in the still air. The moment the circle was complete, a howl of rage echoed from the depths below, not human, not animal, but something far older and infinitely hungrier. "It knows what we're doing," Ayanna said grimly. "The real test begins now." She lit the sage and its smoke drifted downward into the well shaft instead of rising naturally. As the sacred herb burned, the howling grew louder, joined by other sounds, scratching as if massive claws were scraping against stone, and that haunting melody that had first called to Emily. Phase 1 complete, Ayana announced. Now we must speak the binding words while offering what the hunger craves most. And what does it crave? Hope. Dreams. The future we imagine for ourselves and our loved ones. Ayana's weathered hands shook as she prepared the final elements of the ritual. I must ask you, Mr. Morrison, what do you want most in this world? Samuel thought of his family, his dreams of prosperity, his vision of turning this harsh land into a thriving farm that would secure his children's future. I want my family to be safe and prosperous. I want to succeed here, to build something lasting. Then that is what you must sacrifice. You must genuinely release those dreams, offer them to the hunger in exchange for sealing its prison. Only true sacrifice will power the binding. The howling from below intensified, and suddenly the temperature plummeted so drastically that frost began forming on the ground around them. But worse than the cold were the voices that began drifting up from the well. Familiar voices, beloved voices. Papa, it was Emily's voice, but impossibly distant and echoing. Papa, I'm lost in the dark. I need you to come find me. Samuel lunged toward the well, but Ayana grabbed his arm. It's not her. Your daughter is safe in your home. The hunger mimics what we love most. Samuel, please. Now it was Martha's voice, desperate and terrified. I fell into the well. I can't climb out. Please, you have to help me. Samuel's rational mind knew it wasn't real, but his heart pounded with terror. The voices were perfect mimicries, carrying every inflection and emotion he associated with his family's speech. Help us, Papa. Jacob's voice joined the chorus. It's so cold down here and something scary is coming closer. Begin the binding words, Ayana commanded, raising her grandfather's horseshoe. Now, before the illusions grow stronger, Samuel forced himself to focus on the ritual, speaking the English translation of the binding words while Ayana chanted in Apache. But as their voices rose, the well began to emit a strange, pulsing light, not warm like flame, but cold and greenish, like foxfire in a swamp. From that eerie glow came visions that made Samuel stumble in his recitation. He saw himself as a prosperous rancher, his land stretching for miles, his children grown and successful. He saw Martha in beautiful dresses, their house expanded into a mansion, respect and admiration from everyone in the county. Don't look at the visions, Ayana warned, but her own voice wavered. Samuel could see tears streaming down her weathered cheeks as she stared into the light. What was she seeing? What dreams was the hunger offering her? The cold light pulsed brighter, and now the visions included Samuel's deepest fears resolved. He saw his children protected from every danger, his family living in perfect harmony, all their struggles and hardships erased. All he had to do was stop the ritual, embrace the hunger, let it feed on his neighbors and strangers instead of his loved ones. It's lying, Samuel gasped, forcing the words out through chattering teeth. All lies and promises it can't keep. But doubt crept into his heart as the visions grew more vivid, more tempting. What if this was real? What if he was throwing away his family's one chance at true happiness? The binding ritual reached its climax. Ayana threw the iron horseshoe into the well while Samuel released his dreams of prosperity, genuinely sacrificing his deepest desires. The moment he truly let go of his dreams, not just spoke the words but felt them leave his heart, the cold light flared blindingly bright. The hunger's scream of rage shook the ground beneath their feet. The temperature warmed suddenly, the frost melting so quickly it created an instant fog. And then, with a sound like a massive stone door slamming shut, silence fell over the clearing. Is it over? Samuel asked weakly. Ayana nodded, exhaustion clear in her voice. The first binding is complete, but we must seal the physical opening as well, permanently, before dawn breaks. As they prepared to lower the replacement cover and fill the well with stones and concrete, Samuel felt a profound emptiness where his dreams of prosperity had once lived. But alongside that loss came something unexpected, a deep peace and the certain knowledge that his family was safe. They worked through the night, permanently sealing the well. But neither Samuel nor Ayana noticed the small crack that had opened in the ground nearby, or the faint scratching sounds that still echoed from somewhere far below. The hunger was bound, but not destroyed. And it had learned much about human nature during its brief taste of freedom. It could wait. It was very, very good at waiting. 3 months passed after the binding ritual, and life on the Morrison farm settled into a new routine. Samuel had found a reliable water source in a natural spring on the western edge of his property. And though it required more work to channel the water for irrigation, it was clean and abundant. The dreams had stopped. Emily no longer stood by windows listening to phantom songs, and Jacob had returned to his normal, cheerful self. Martha had noticed the change in Samuel. He seemed more at peace somehow, less driven by the restless ambition that had once consumed him. She attributed it to finally settling into their new life. "You seem different, Sam," she observed one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. "Calmer, more present." Samuel nodded, understanding her observation. The sacrifice of his greatest dreams had left him changed but not diminished. Instead of constantly striving for some imagined perfect future, he found joy in simple moments, Emily's laughter as she played with her doll, Jacob's excitement when he successfully helped with the farm chores, Martha's gentle smile over morning coffee. "I guess I learned what really matters," he said simply. The farm was modest but successful. Samuel's crops grew well with the spring water, and he'd established good relationships with neighbors who appreciated his steady, reliable nature. He no longer dreamed of vast wealth or regional prominence. He aimed for sufficiency, security, and the kind of quiet happiness that came from honest work and family love. Ayana visited occasionally, always examining the sealed well site carefully. The concrete and stone covering remained solid, showing no signs of disturbance. The strange crack in the nearby ground had never spread or deepened, and wildlife had returned to the area, always a good sign that unnatural influences were truly contained. "The binding holds strong," she assured Samuel during her most recent visit. "The hunger sleeps deep, its path to your world sealed." Life had found a peaceful rhythm until the day Thomas Caldwell returned. Samuel was repairing a fence when he saw the familiar wagon approaching his farmhouse. Caldwell looked older, more haggard than Samuel remembered, his clothes expensive but somehow disheveled. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his hands trembled slightly as he climbed down from his wagon. "Morrison," Caldwell called out, his voice carrying a desperate edge. "I need to talk to you about the land, about the well." Samuel set down his tools warily. "Mr. Caldwell, I wasn't expecting to see you again." "I made a mistake selling to you," Caldwell said without preamble. "I want to buy the land back. I'll pay double what you gave me, triple even. But I need access to that well." "The well is sealed," Samuel replied carefully. "Permanently. There's no water source there anymore." Caldwell's eyes grew wild. "You don't understand. I need it. The dreams, they never stopped after I left. Every night I hear it calling me back. It promised me things, Morrison. Wealth beyond imagination, power, everything I ever wanted. But I have to come back to complete the bargain." Samuel felt a chill of recognition. The man was clearly suffering, trapped by promises the hunger had made before the binding ritual. "Mr. Caldwell, whatever you think that place offered you, it was lying. The well was dangerous. We had to seal it for everyone's safety." "Lying?" Caldwell laughed bitterly. "I've seen the proof. Look." He pulled a leather pouch from his coat and poured its contents onto Samuel's work table. Gold nuggets, more than Samuel had ever seen in one place, gleamed in the afternoon sunlight. "Where did you get this?" "From the well," Caldwell whispered. "Before I sold the land, I went down there. I followed the tunnels, found chambers filled with gold, with treasures beyond counting. But when I tried to bring more than this handful to the surface, it all turned to dust in the sunlight. The voice told me I could have it all, but only if I stayed below, only if I brought others to share the wealth." Samuel's blood ran cold. "You went down into the caverns? How long were you down there?" "Hours, days. Time moves strangely in the deep places." Caldwell's voice took on a dreamy quality. "It showed me visions of the future, cities of gold, myself as a king among men. All I have to do is return and bring others with me. Starting with you and your family." The pieces clicked together in Samuel's mind with horrible clarity. Caldwell hadn't just been influenced by the hunger. He'd been partially consumed by it, transformed into a lure to draw others to their doom. That explained his gaunt appearance, his trembling hands, the desperate hunger in his eyes that had nothing to do with food or water. "Mr. Caldwell, you need to leave my land," Samuel said firmly, "and you need to stay away from that well site. You don't understand." Caldwell grabbed Samuel's arm with surprising strength. It's calling me back. Every night the dreams grow stronger. If I don't return soon, if I don't bring others, it will come looking for me, and it knows where to find my family, my friends, everyone I've ever loved. Samuel pulled free from Caldwell's grasp. The well is sealed. Whatever hold that thing had on you, it's broken now. But even as he spoke the words, Samuel noticed something that made his heart sink. The gold nuggets on his table were beginning to tarnish and crumble, turning to ordinary dust in the fading daylight. And from somewhere in the distance, from the direction of the sealed well, came a sound that chilled him to the bone. Scratching. Patient, persistent scratching, as if something far below was slowly, methodically working its way through stone and concrete. Caldwell heard it too, his face lighting up with terrible joy. "It's calling me home," he whispered. "And now it knows you're here too, Morrison. It knows about your beautiful family." As Caldwell climbed back onto his wagon and rode away into the gathering dusk, Samuel ran toward his house. He had to warn Martha, had to protect the children. The binding ritual had worked, but apparently it hadn't been strong enough to sever all connections to those the hunger had already touched. Behind him, the scratching sound grew louder, more determined, and for the first time in 3 peaceful months, Samuel heard something that made his blood freeze in his veins. The distant sound of hungry laughter echoing across his land. The hunger was patient. It had waited decades before, and it could wait again. But it had also learned from its temporary freedom. It knew now that it didn't need to escape its prison to feed. It could send its servants to gather food and bring it back to the deep places below. That night, Samuel barely slept. He positioned himself by the bedroom window, rifle loaded and ready, watching for any sign of movement in the darkness. Martha sensed his tension immediately. "Sam, what's wrong? You look like you're expecting an attack." Samuel chose his words carefully, not wanting to frighten her unnecessarily. "Thomas Caldwell came by today. He's changed since he sold us the land. I think he might cause trouble." "What kind of trouble?" "I'm not sure yet. But I want you and the children to stay close to the house for a while. Don't go anywhere alone, especially not toward the eastern boundary." Martha studied his face in the dim lamplight. "This is about that well, isn't it?" "The one you sealed up." "Samuel, what really happened out there?" Samuel was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. Through Emily's bedroom window, he could see a figure standing at the edge of the lamplight's reach. Thomas Caldwell, but somehow different. In the moonlight, the man seemed taller, thinner, his shadow stretching impossibly long across the ground. "Emily, come away from the window," Martha whispered urgently. "But he says he has wonderful stories to tell me," Emily continued, her voice taking on that dreamy quality Samuel remembered from months before. "He says there are treasures hidden underground, and he wants to show me where they are." Samuel threw open the window and shouted, "Caldwell, get off my property!" The figure at the edge of the light turned toward him, and Samuel gasped. In the moonlight, Caldwell's face looked gaunt to the point of being skeletal, his eyes reflecting light like an animal's. When he smiled, his teeth seemed too sharp, too numerous. "Morrison," Caldwell's voice carried strangely, seeming to come from multiple directions at once. "You can't hide from what's coming. The deep places are calling, and we all must answer eventually." Samuel raised his rifle, but Caldwell had already melted back into the darkness, disappearing as silently as smoke. The temperature around the house began to drop rapidly, frost forming on the windows despite the mild spring weather. "Mama, I'm cold," Jacob whimpered from his bed. "And I keep hearing people talking underground." Samuel's heart sank. The hunger's influence was spreading again, reaching for his children through its corrupted servant. He needed help, needed Ayanna's wisdom about how to protect his family from something that could send human agents to do its bidding. "Martha, pack emergency supplies," Samuel ordered. "Food, warm clothes, everything we might need for several days away from the house." "Away from the house?" "Samuel, this is our home. Our home isn't safe anymore. I need to find Ayanna, need to understand how to stop this. But I won't leave you and the children here unprotected." They spent the rest of the night packing by lamplight, the children confused but obedient. As dawn approached, Samuel hitched up their wagon and loaded their possessions. They would go to the nearest town, find safety in numbers while Samuel figured out how to deal with Caldwell and the growing threat. But as they prepared to leave, Emily suddenly pointed toward the eastern boundary. Papa, look. The pretty lady is back. In the distance, where the sealed well lay hidden among the oak trees, a column of strange cold light was rising into the dawn sky. And silhouetted against that unnatural glow, Samuel could see not one figure but several, Thomas Caldwell and at least 3 others, all moving with the same unnaturally fluid gait. More servants. Samuel realized with growing horror. The hunger is gathering an army. They fled toward town at dangerous speed, the wagon bouncing over rough terrain as Samuel pushed their horse harder than he ever had before. Behind them, that cold light continued to rise, and Samuel could swear he heard multiple voices calling his children's names in perfect harmony. The town of Cedar Creek was small but bustling, built around the intersection of 2 major cattle trails. Samuel found temporary lodging at the boarding house and immediately asked about Ayanna's whereabouts. The Apache woman? The boarding house keeper, Mrs. Patterson, looked puzzled. She comes through town occasionally, but she doesn't stay long. Last I heard, she was camping near the old mission ruins about 5 miles north. Samuel left Martha and the children under Mrs. Patterson's watchful eye and rode hard toward the mission ruins. He found Ayanna sitting beside a small fire as if she'd been expecting him. "The binding is breaking," she said without preamble. "I felt it 3 days ago, a tremor in the spiritual realm like a crack forming in a dam." Caldwell came back. "He's changed, corrupted somehow, and he's not alone anymore." Samuel quickly explained the night's events. Ayanna's weathered face grew grave. "I feared this might happen. The binding ritual we performed was powerful, but it was designed to contain a sleeping entity. If the hunger had already claimed servants before we sealed it, those connections remained partially intact. How do we stop them? The servants are no longer fully human, but they retain human weaknesses. They cannot cross running water, cannot enter consecrated ground, and they grow weak in direct sunlight. But their greatest weakness is also their source of power, their connection to the hunger below. I don't understand. They are extensions of the entity, drawing their unnatural strength from its will. But this connection works both ways. If we can capture one of the servants and break its link to the hunger, the backlash might damage the entity enough to strengthen our original binding. Samuel felt a glimmer of hope. How do we capture something that isn't fully human anymore? "With bait it cannot resist," Ayanna said grimly. "The servants are driven by the hunger's needs, and what the hunger wants most is your family. We use that desire against it." The plan Ayanna outlined was dangerous, requiring Samuel to use his children as apparent bait, while keeping them actually safe. But as they discussed the details, a new sound reached them, the distant sound of horses approaching at full gallop. "Someone's coming fast," Samuel observed, reaching for his rifle. 3 riders emerged from the darkness, their faces gaunt and eyes reflecting the firelight like animals. Samuel recognized Thomas Caldwell in the lead, but the other 2 were strangers, a woman in a tattered dress and an elderly man whose beard was white as bone. "Morrison," Caldwell called out as they reined in their horses just beyond the firelight. "You cannot run from destiny forever. The deep places call to your children, and they will answer whether you help them or not." Ayanna stood slowly, speaking in her native language. The words seemed to create a barrier around their campfire. The 3 corrupted servants could come no closer, though their horses stamped and whinnied in distress. "Your binding tricks won't work forever." "Old woman," the corrupted woman spoke, her voice layered with echoes. "We are patient. We are hungry, and we know where the children sleep tonight." "Cedar Creek is built on consecrated ground," Ayanna replied calmly. "The mission fathers blessed the entire area before they built. You cannot enter the town." Caldwell's laugh was like the sound of grinding stone. "Perhaps not, but we can wait. Sooner or later they must leave, and when they do we will be ready." The 3 servants wheeled their horses and disappeared into the darkness, but Samuel knew they wouldn't go far. They would watch, wait for any opportunity to claim his family. "We need to end this tonight," Samuel said grimly. "I won't live with my children as prisoners, afraid to leave consecrated ground." Ayanna nodded. "Then we spring the trap at dawn. The servants will be weakest in direct sunlight, and the hunger's attention will be focused on trying to claim your family. That moment of vulnerability is our only chance." As they planned through the remainder of the night, neither Samuel nor Ayanna noticed the small crack forming in the ground beneath their feet, or the faint sound of something very large stirring far below the earth. The hunger was done being patient. If its servants could not bring the family to it, it would find another way to feed. Dawn broke gray and overcast as Samuel and Ayanna returned to Cedar Creek. The plan was simple but dangerous. Samuel would take his family to the edge of town, appearing to flee toward the next settlement. When the servants attacked in the open ground, Ayanna would be waiting with the ritual components needed to sever their connection to the hunger. "You're sure the children will be safe?" Martha asked for the third time as they loaded the wagon. "As safe as I can make them," Samuel replied, checking his rifle one final time. "Ayanna knows what she's doing." The first part of the plan worked perfectly. The moment Samuel's wagon left the consecrated ground of Cedar Creek, the 3 corrupted servants appeared, riding hard to intercept them. Samuel drove the wagon toward a predetermined clearing where Ayanna waited in concealment. "Papa, those people look sick," Emily observed with a child's innocent honesty. In daylight, the servants' unnatural appearance was even more disturbing. Their skin had a grayish pallor, and they moved with jerky, uncoordinated motions as if fighting against their own corrupted bodies. "Don't look at them, sweetheart," Samuel advised. "Just hold tight to your mama." The servants surrounded the wagon, but their movements were sluggish in the direct sunlight. Caldwell's voice was weaker now, less commanding. "Give us the children, Morrison. They belong to the deep places now. You cannot protect them forever." "I can try," Samuel replied, raising his rifle. But before he could fire, the ground beneath them began to tremble. A deep, resonant groaning sound emerged from somewhere far below, and cracks began forming in the earth around the clearing. "The binding!" Ayanna shouted from her hiding place. "It's breaking completely." The temperature plummeted instantly, frost forming on the wagon wheels despite the morning sun. From the largest crack in the ground, a sound emerged that made Samuel's blood freeze. The hungry laughter he remembered from the well, but louder now, closer, as if something immense was rising from the depths. "It's coming up," the corrupted woman servant laughed, her voice filled with mad joy. "The hunger rises to claim what was promised." Samuel realized with horror that the entity wasn't content to wait for servants to bring it food. Somehow their original binding ritual had been weakened enough that the hunger could physically manifest on the surface world. "Ayanna, what do we do?" "The iron," she called back. "The ritual iron from your grandfather's horseshoe. It's still connected to the binding. If we can get it back into contact with the entity's physical form, we might be able to force it back down." But the iron horseshoe was at the bottom of the sealed well, buried under tons of concrete and stone. There was no way to retrieve it in time. Unless, Samuel looked at the corrupted servants, understanding flooding through him. They were extensions of the hunger, physically connected to its essence. If he could force one of them into contact with iron, any iron, it might create the same effect. "Martha, take the children and run toward town," Samuel shouted, leaping from the wagon. "Don't stop! Don't look back!" He tackled Thomas Caldwell, grappling with the corrupted man while reaching for the iron buckle on his own belt. Caldwell's strength was unnatural, but the direct sunlight was weakening him. Samuel managed to press the iron buckle against Caldwell's skin. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Caldwell screamed, a sound that contained multiple voices, his own and something far more ancient and hungry. Black smoke poured from the point where iron touched corrupted flesh and the ground stopped trembling. "More iron," Ayanna called, emerging from her hiding place with horseshoe nails from her ritual kit. "We need to touch all of them." The battle that followed was brief but fierce. Samuel and Ayanna managed to force iron contact with each of the corrupted servants, their agonized screams creating a harmony that seemed to resonate deep into the earth. With each touch of honest metal to corrupted flesh, the cracks in the ground sealed themselves. The unnatural cold retreated. When the last servant collapsed, the silence that followed was profound and complete. The 3 corrupted individuals lay unconscious but breathing, their gaunt features already beginning to return to normal human proportions. "Is it over?" Samuel asked weakly. Ayanna knelt and pressed her ear to the ground, listening for any sound from below. After a long moment, she nodded. "The hunger sleeps again, deeper than before. The binding is not just restored. It's stronger now, tempered by iron and sacrifice." Samuel found his family huddled together at the edge of the clearing, Martha shielding the children with her own body. When she saw him approaching, alive and unharmed, she burst into tears of relief. "Papa, are the sick people better now?" Emily asked. Samuel looked back at the three unconscious figures. Thomas Caldwell was already stirring, his eyes clear and human for the first time in months. "Yes, sweetheart. They're going to be just fine."